to the greatest pleasure ship ever built. Good times forever!
I have something here, sir.
I've never seen anything like this.
It's a malfunction, sir.
That's impossible. Where are they coming from?
I don't know, sir, but whatever it is, it's, big.
They answered a distress call.
Where the hell is everybody?
Now,
What the hell was that?
they're dead in the water.
I got a really bad feeling about this.
The ship's infested. Let's get the hell out of here!
What the hell is that?
Girl from Ipanema.
I don't mean to sound like a wuss, but this is starting to freak me out, man.
I vote we leave. Who votes we leave?
Deep Rising.
Arriving on January 30th, 1998, Deep Rising premiered in cinemas. The film was written and directed by Stephen Sommers. He would go on to do the first two Mummy films, Van Helsing and G.I. Joe. Producers Lawrence Mark and John Baldacci managed to assemble a $45 million budget to reintroduce the monster creature genre in the hopes of being successful. Due to Titanic still dominating the box office, Deep Rising was met with negative criticism, only recouping around $11 million in the US, resulting in a box office bomb for the company. It was released internationally a few months later, but it's unknown what the earnings were, and in the end, it was still deemed a failure by the studio. The studio involved in the distribution was the defunct Hollywood Pictures. It was a division of the Walt Disney Company similar to that of Touchstone Pictures, in which those studios produced films with darker themes rather than the family-friendly ones at Walt Disney. Audience members were treated to several creature monster features in 1997, such as Anaconda, An American Werewolf in Paris, The Relic, Mimic, and Alien Resurrection, making it feel like Deep Rising came too late. Filming did begin in June of 1996 and lasted until October of that year. It was intended to be an early creature feature for the studio, as there hadn't been one in years, but special effects problems delayed its release for over a year, resulting in the dump month of January 1998. Stephen Sommers had made two films with the Walt Disney Company, writing and directing The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and the live-action version of The Jungle Book. Both were modest successes at the box office. His sole writing credits included Gunman, Tom and Huck, and the TV movie Oliver Twist. Since he worked under Hollywood Pictures as a staff writer, according to some, he was able to write the script for Deep Rising, originally called Tentacle, presented the idea to the studio, which they liked, and greenlit the project. The idea was to homage the original 1950s movies of the past while attempting to reinvent something different. For our cast, we have the late Treat Williams portraying the main lead, Captain John Finnegan. Treat Williams sadly passed away last year in June of 2023 due to a motorcycle crash that eventually took his life. Originally, Harrison Ford was offered the role of Finnegan. Ford, however, ended up turning the role down, and Williams accepted it, resulting in the budget being downsized to the current $45 million that it was produced on. Treat Williams had a productive film career underneath his belt, appearing in such films 1941, Prince of the City, Flashpoint, Dead Heat, The Phantom, and The Devil's Own. After Deep Rising, he also starred in the critically acclaimed TV drama Everwood, and he still acted in many features such as The Substitute sequels, Miss Congeniality 2, and 127 Hours. Famke Janssen portrays Trillian, who eventually tags along with Finnegan and becomes an eventual love interest. Famke was the last person to be cast because Claire Filani originated the part and actually begun shooting, but just after 3 days of filming, Claire Filani and Stephen Sommers had created differences and she was dropped from the film as a result. Famke had a few television appearances and notable shows such as Star Trek The Next Generation and Melrose Place. She had several film credits as well, appearing in Fathers and Sons with Jeff Goldblum, appearing in Lord of Illusions with Scott Bakula, and her big breakthrough role in the James Bond film Goldeneye as Xena. Janssen would later appear in a few other horror-related films, such as The Faculty and House on Haunted Hill in 1999. It took a bit of convincing by the producers to push her for the role because of her big breakthrough in Goldeneye. Her most prominent role was Jean Grey in all the X-Men films. Famke still maintains her film and TV career to this day. Anthony Held portrays Simon Canton, the owner of the Argonautica. Like Famke Janssen, he was another late cast member addition. Held was known for his role as Hannibal Lecter's doctor in Silence of the Lambs, and he would reprise that role in Red Dragon. He also had an appearance in another 1991 film, which was a comedy called The Super, that had Joe Pesci. Held would also appear in the John Grisham films as different characters, such as The Pelican Brief, The Client, and A Time to Kill. He also appeared as a villain in the family comedy film Bushwhacked with Daniel Stern. After Deep Rising, he would go on to appear in a few other notable films, such as 8mm, X-Men The Last Stand as Mystique's interrogator, and also I remember him for his appearance on Boston Legal as the judge. He could continue to act up until 2020. Kevin J. O'Connor portrays Joey Pantucci, a mechanic and best friend of Finnegan's. Joey is considered the comic relief of the film, and Kevin actually improvised some lines of dialogue which Stephen Sommers would allow.
Thing I can do to make your trip more comfortable. You come to me, okay? Can you just get asthma? Or do you have to be born with it?
Kevin would appear in notable films such as Steel Magnolias, FX2, Hero, No Escape, Color of Night, Virtual City. He and Famke also starred together in The Lord of Illusions, and also appeared in Amistad. After Deep Rising, Kevin J. O'Connor and Stephen Sommers had a good working relationship and would work together on several films, such as The Mummy, Van Helsing, and G.I. Joe. He would still maintain his career in various film and TV appearances up until 2020. Wes Studi portrays Hanover, the leader of the mercenaries, and who, along with Finnegan, was hired to sink the Argonautica. Wes Studi had prominent roles in well-known films such as Dances with Wolves, Last of the Mohicans, Geronimo, and Street Fighter. After Deep Rising, he still continued to maintain a lengthy career in film and TV, appearing in films such as Mystery Man, Undisputed, and Avatar. He still remains active in the film and TV world to this day. Derek O'Connor portrays Captain H.W. Atherton, who commands the Argonautica. Derek has a notable resume in film and TV. His most well-known works were Brazil, Lethal Weapon 2, and after this film, later appearing in End of Days and Daredevil. Derek later reflected that he hated making the movie because he felt bored during the production and felt that his character wasn't particularly interesting. He didn't complain about the paycheck he received, and from what I understood, all the cast members got paid very well for making this movie. Derek would maintain his career until his death in 2018. Jason Fleming portrays Mulligan, a mercenary within Hanover's group. Jason had worked with Stephen Sommers before in the live-action version of The Jungle Book and got along with the director quite well. Other notable roles in films such as Dr. Jekyll in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and like Famke, he also appeared in an X-Men film as well. He appeared in the prequel X-Men First Class as Azazel. He still maintains his acting career till this very day. Cliff Curtis portrays Mamuli, another mercenary in Hanover's group. Cliff was just getting his career started. He appeared in another similar film called Virus in 1999, and later that same year he had several roles in prominent films such as Three Kings, Bringing Out the Dead, and The Insider. The role I mostly remembered him for was the Wolf in Collateral Damage with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Cliff would still have a stable career in films such as Live Free or Die Hard, the Avatar sequel, and the Meg films. Clifton Powell portrays Mason, another mercenary in Hanover's group. Powell had previously appeared in the film Dead Presidents, and right before Deep Rising opened, he appeared in another sci-fi horror film called Phantoms that had Ben Affleck in it. Powell's character Mason died much earlier in the film, but Powell was told by Stephen Sommers his character could live in an additional 20 pages if he knew how to swim. Later on, Powell would appear in another horror film called Bones, which had Snoop Dogg in the lead role. And he also appeared in the critically praised 2004 biographical drama Ray, which starred Jamie Foxx in the leading role. Powell still maintains a highly productive career throughout this day. The late Trevor Goddard portrays T-Ray. Sadly, Trevor passed away in 2003. Trevor is best known for his role as Kano in the 1995 video game adaptation Mortal Kombat. He would also later appear in the highly critically acclaimed series Jag for a couple of seasons. He also had a very memorable Hoover vacuum cleaner commercial as well.
I can clean that floor, mate.
The Hoover Floor Mate for hard floors. It vacuums, it washes and scrubs, then squeegees floors dry. Floor Mate from Hoover.
Damon Hansu plays Vivo. Damon had earlier roles in prominent films such as Stargate and the critically acclaimed Amistad. After Deep Rising, he would have a very lengthy film career, appearing in Gladiator, Lara Croft, Cradle of Life, Blood Diamond, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Furious 7. He still maintains a very productive film career to this very day. Una Damon portrays Layla, the shipmate and girlfriend of Joey. Una had quite a year in 1998 after appearing in this movie. She appeared in Deep Impact and The Truman Show. Both of those were successful at the box office. She also had an uncredited role in the box office smash hit Spider-Man as the lab tour guide, who also informs Peter and his classmates the different species of spiders shown in the movie. Una's last acting credit was in 2007 and more than likely retired afterwards. And finally, we have Clint Curtis, who portrays Billy, another mercenary. He eventually gets half digested by the monster in a very effective key sequence. Curtis had a productive career but has not acted in anything since 2018. For the film's plot and story, luxury cruise owner Simon Kenton is celebrating the launch of his new vessel called the Argonautica, specifically passing through the South China Seas. The ship is full of wealthy guests enjoying their time, but they're unaware that something below them is brewing. Meanwhile, Captain John Finnegan and his crew are hired by a mercenary named Hanover to pilot them and his team to an undisclosed location somewhere in the South China Sea, in the middle of the ocean. Back on the Argonautica, a saboteur disables all communication and navigational systems, which ends up stranding the ocean liner. Moments later, the vessel is hit by an unknown object from below, leaving the ship pretty much dead in the water.
What are they?
50 meters.
Finnegan's vessel collides with a speedboat shaken loose from the Argonautica, damaging it significantly. The mercenaries take over by revealing their intentions to loot the passengers and the vault of the Argonautica, as well as sinking the vessel with torpedoes. Upon arrival on the stranded vessel, Finnegan, Joey, and the mercenaries climb aboard, leaving Layla and Billy to repair Finnegan's boat. When they breach the ballroom, they discover, to their horror, blood and no signs of the passengers. Finnegan and Joey go to the engine room under the guidance of T-Ray and Mamuli to scavenge parts. In the end, both T-Ray and Mamuli are dragged and killed by an unseen creature. Finnegan and Joey frantically escape and meet up with Trillian, a passenger who was imprisoned earlier in the film from stealing from the captain before the ship was struck by the creatures. Hanover and the remaining mercenaries locate the vault, with Vivo opening it only to be killed by Ken accidentally.
Yes. Money, 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 money.
Stop! Jesus Christ, son of a bitch!
All the survivors eventually meet up. Then Canton and the captain explain that unknown tentacle sea monsters attack their vessel, killing all the passengers, and the ship is infested with them. Realizing there's little options available, Finnegan decides it's time to get off the boat before they're killed off one by one by the tentacle monsters, preventing their escape. As stated early, filming commenced in June of 1996. They filmed in and around in Vancouver on an 85-day schedule, specifically in the versatile shipyards on a historical ship assembly plant on the city's North Shore. Crew built several sets, which included the engine room, exterior of the Argonautica, the deck, and the 2 sets of hallways to be filled with water. This was done because Sommers claimed that the actual cruise ships were too cramped, making it impossible to film inside of them, and it did not allow the freedom of the desired camera angles to move at 360 degrees, which would be up, down, and sideways. Cinematographer Howard Atherton was hired because of his work on Bad Boys. Atherton almost didn't want the job, mainly because he wanted to focus on drama. After some persuasion from Sommers, he eventually gave in and accepted the job. Atherton discovered that the crew had difficulty being unprepared for the amount of shooting in water, so he had to rig a system to solve the problem by setting cameras underneath the water to pretty much get the desired shots that the director needed. For the sequence when the creature collides with the Argonautica, that was filmed by well-known cinematographer Dean Cundy for the second unit. Dean Cundey had worked with under prominent directors such as Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, and John Carpenter, and his experience provided a very effective sequence that still holds up to this day. The practical effects in this movie were designed by Rob Bottin, a very well-known FX artist who worked on loads of films ranging from The Fog, The Howling, The Thing, Legend, RoboCop films, Inner Space, Total Recall, Basic Instinct, Mission Impossible, and Mimic. The person responsible for supervising and running things was Stephen Dupuis, who had worked with Chris Wallace before on a number of films. Rob would often design and create the practical effects from his own primary studio in LA. Then they would be shipped to the Vancouver Creature Shop on site, where makeup effects artists Stephen Dupuis, Doug Moreau, and Brad Proctor would be receiving the rubber tentacles and the sculptures and molds of the character Billy for his elaborate death scene. They would also contribute to some other practical effects, such as the decayed skeletal remains that you see in a couple scenes. They first see the remains in a very small, narrow corridor, then you would see the more extensive skeletal remains in several shots in the bow of the ship. Both Brad and Doug worked on Captain Atherton's death scene, which was far more graphic than what was seen on the screen. Originally, his ears, eyes, and mouth were going to bleed, resulting in the brain popping out of the skull. It was animatronically designed and had very unique facial features, but sadly this death scene would not be used as it was deemed too graphic and gory to use, so it was scaled back considerably to what you see now. However, despite all this, they were able to create a standout sequence from the practical side, which involved Billy's semi-digested scene, to which they took the sculptures and molds and were able to pour gelatin into them, and eventually they would glue them onto the actor's face, and also they would throw tons of goo on the actor before each take. They would throw tons of it to create the more bloody sequence, and it's a sequence of both practical and CGI blended very well together, and still to this day it holds up very well. As for Rob Bottin, sadly this will be the last creature effects film that he had any significant involvement in before leaving the industry for good. For the film's visual effects, there were several companies that handled this, such as DreamQuest Images, Blair Studios, Band from the Ranch Entertainment, and Industrial Light and Magic. Band from the Ranch Entertainment did the display navigational system and the underwater system when Mason is dragged off by the creature. Blair Studios did the semi-digested Billy scene where we see the CGI skeletal form that merged with actor Clint Curtis for the very elaborate, nasty sequence, which is still visually convincing today. DreamQuest Images were hired to create the visual creature effects, but it had a much heavier workload than anticipated. According to John Burton at Industrial Light and Magic, through a 911 call, they were brought in to lighten the load for DreamQuest for some pivotal sequences. Although they were given freedom from a visual consistency standpoint, Burton says they worked very hard to match their visual effects 100% with DreamQuest by respecting the look of Rob Bottin's creature design and valuing hard-working, consistent shots, as well as to make them better since they were brought in late during post-production. The sequences they were involved in was the tentacle chase scene with Finnegan and Trillian on the jet ski, and the very end sequence on the island in which Finnegan, Joey, and Trillian are stranded on. In the end, both sequences still look visually convincing to this day. The film's score was provided by legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry is no stranger in composing film genres like horror, action, and sci-fi, as he's done this previously for films such as Alien, first 3 Rambo films, Leviathan, Total Recall, Congo, several of the Star Trek films, and Air Force One. Based on his experience in combining action and horror cues, he really does a very good job of blending them in seamlessly, specifically for the horror action driving cues of when the characters are in danger. It sounds quite similar to that of his Alien and Rambo and Air Force One scores with a bit of an update. For the equipment he uses his trademark keyboards, which play row and mixing electronic sounds with a very large orchestra. In typical Jerry fashion, he also composed a main theme for the film, which kind of repeats itself here and there. Overall, Jerry's work has always been superb, and his deep rising score is very good, but doesn't get much recognition due to his large, extensive resume. His soundtrack did get a release in 1998, but only had 33 minutes of music, so a good chunk of it was missing. 2014, we did get an expanded edition by Entrada Records, but was limited and has since gone out of print. A physical copy goes for over $150, from private sellers on eBay. But the good news is you can listen to Jerry's full expanded score on YouTube for free. Sadly, I never saw Deep Rising in theaters. I did see a trailer, but I was too young and more than likely no one was going to take me to see it. Eventually, I watched this on TV years later at some point, either with a friend or I saw it very late at night. No matter what, I definitely enjoyed the movie and wasn't disappointed. The film didn't take itself seriously and was quite fun for an action horror film with some humorous moments throughout. The actors seemed to be having fun with the material, probably because based on its tone, they were parodying themselves to an extent as they seemed to be in on the joke. Films like The Relic and The Mimic are meant to be taken seriously with their approach, while Deep Rising is basically a highly budgeted, no-nonsense B-movie that wants to take you on the ride and keep thrilling you to the very end. Stephen Sommers really knows how to balance the action, horror, and humorous elements quite well, especially during the jump scares and action sequences that take place throughout. He really knows how to handle character dynamic situations where the heroes, anti-heroes, and villains, if you will, are then thrown into a life and death type of atmosphere on the ship, which they have to work together to survive. It becomes pure typical 90s entertainment schlock at its finest, because it's attempting to be a throwback to the 1950s movies in the past, as I stated earlier. You'll have some cheesy dialogue here and there. You'll definitely jump when the monsters strike, and definitely laugh and cheer when the action occurs. Now, despite the fact that I enjoyed the film for what it is, there is some drawbacks as well, such as the lopsided dialogue that occurs here and there, poor exposition, specifically with the character Simon Canton, who all of a sudden reveals the specific species of the tentacle sea creatures that invaded his ship earlier. Just because you're an owner of your own cruise liner does not give you first-hand knowledge of them. It comes across as forced and rather shoehorned in at the last minute, mainly because there is no marine biologist whatsoever, not to mention Ken even stated earlier, when the creature had collided with the Argonautica, what are they? So it doesn't quite fit that character as it should. Another problem is whenever certain character members would break away from the group, it becomes predictable, mainly because you know they'll eventually meet their death sooner or later. Also, the CGI is a mixed bag. In certain shots, it's quite effective, but when it lingers on the shot for more than it should, it starts to lose its believability, often giving you time to criticize it at any given moment. Regardless, I still enjoyed the film for delivering its high-quality tongue-in-cheek tone. For the pros, despite the issues that I have with the movie, the positives definitely outweigh the bad, mainly because it's not asking you to take this film seriously. The action sequences, when the monster first strikes the boat, or when the characters are opening fire or escaping to survive, they're executed to a high standard. When we see the tentacle creatures on screen, they're very well lit and designed, and do become a threat, especially when they're making this creepy sound or when their mouths open when they're about to consume a person. However, as I stated earlier, upon when the camera lingers on its movement for far too long, especially when it's having to do more extravagant things, it certainly loses its realism and becomes your typical 90s CGI Latin fest. Despite the fact that at this point, digital effects were really starting to take over. A good example of this is the CGI main monster, which involves Finnegan and Trillian towards the tail end, and while the overall sequence is highly ambitious, it's definitely dated now after 25 years, but you gotta give the digital visual effects artists some credit for trying to attempt to push the envelope for what time they had, not to mention Treat Williams makes that sequence fun to watch as well. However, I must say I enjoyed the chase sequence with Finnegan and Trillian when they're escaping the tentacle creatures on a jet ski. Not only is it because it's the life and death situation, it's the most intense, fast-paced, silly, and fun sequence that just thrills you to the end. It also ends on a bang when the ship explodes, putting the cherry on top. The best thing that I can definitely say about Deep Rising is its characters and the cast that betrays them. Treat Williams specifically, let's just say this. He's the standout throughout the movie. He's just plain awesome as Finnegan. He's very good at playing this cheesy hero role quite well. He just gets it. He's having a ball playing this character and has very good screen presence and charisma, especially with the rest of the cast. Now sadly, he didn't have another high-caliber leading role after Deep Rising. He did appear in the substitute sequels and Everwood. It was nowhere near this dynamic like he did in Deep Rising. And sadly, despite a very good Kino Lorber release back in 2018 on Blu-ray and DVD, he was not interviewed. And it's really quite upsetting because According to some, he did like making the movie, but I wish we would have gotten an official interview with Treat Williams, which would have given, have his thoughts and have, his honest opinions on the film and what it was like making it. And sadly, we're not going to get that due to his death back in 2023. An interesting bit of trivia, he was actually good friends with Christopher Reeve. Yes, that Christopher Reeve from Superman. Quite a shame they never made a movie together. What a joy it would have been to see those two actors in a film. As for the rest of the cast, Famke Janssen does a really solid job overall. She manages to hold her own in certain scenes. Just wished she would have gotten a bit more to do, especially with her confrontation against Simon Canton, in which Anthony Hale does a great job of portraying that character, who eventually becomes a sniffling weasel of a character, especially when he turns against the guests, the crew, and the team by attempting to make a profit for insurance-related purposes in the hopes of sinking the vessel. Kevin J. O'Connor does a great job of his performance as Joey, who adds the humorous element because the nature of his role was adding comic relief. Originally, the character of Joey was meant to be dead when Finnegan is holding his hat, but when previewed with the test audiences, they didn't like it, so instead, Finnegan's surfboard was then later added digitally to ensure that Joey somehow survived and managed to meet it with Finnegan and Trillian on the island, potentially setting up a sequel which never happened due to the film's box office performance. Wes Studi is great as Hanover. He does his best to maintain the situation with his serious determination and demeanor throughout the film. Even the rest of the actors playing the mercenaries have standout scenes, mainly because the actors overall are highly invested in their characters. I also like the fact that it set up a potential sequel or a potential new franchise going forward, whether that was going to be King Kong or Journey to the Center of the Earth, who really knows. I would have definitely believed that Stephen Sommers could have handled that type of atmosphere, but sadly he never got that chance due to the fact that the film bombed at the box office, and because of that, Stephen Sommers shifted away from any ongoing sequels and focused more on The Mummy, which skyrocketed his career. Thankfully, the film found an audience in the years to come, given its proper respect that it deserves decades after its release. I will say this about Stephen Sommers as a filmmaker. His films can definitely be fun and entertaining to watch, despite his writing not being the best and a bit problematic in his films. But his 90s work, specifically with Deep Rising and The Mummy, and to a certain extent its sequel The Mummy Returns, with the film coming out 2 years later in 2001, and despite the issues that I have with that film, they are clearly his best because they are fun and exciting and take you on this very great journey that just never lets up. After The Mummy Returns, Sommers only did a handful of features afterwards. He was later considered a hit-or-miss director critically due to his overuse of CGI and his typical writing formula, which used a lot of forced exposition, whether it was dialogue or story-related, was wearing thin with audiences. Films like Van Helsing had a great lead in Hugh Jackman, but had way too much CGI and a very convoluted story. G.I. Joe, you can say, was more fun, but several action sequences felt like it was something out of a video game, and once again also used forced exposition. The last film he directed, Odd Thomas, which featured the late Anton Yelchin, does a really good job in the role and carries the film to an extent, but the film had pacing issues, most of the supporting characters weren't developed, not given much to work with, and don't add much to the story, and yet again, forced exposition. As for Stephen Sommers' career, because of the lawsuits against the production company and financial issues on his last film, Odd Thomas, and refusing to change his writing style, Sommers hasn't directed a feature-length film in over a decade, and has only been credited as an executive producer on the direct-to-video Scorpion King sequels. Overall, in the end, Deep Rising isn't the best of its genre and far from perfect, but it knows what kind of audience it's entertaining. While the film did not perform well, it definitely found its audience decades after its release and hopefully continues to find new moviegoers in the foreseeable future. When you have a film with Treat Williams as the lead, loaded with monsters, over-the-top action, violence, gore, and rounding it off with a superb score by Jerry Goldsmith, you're in for some great popcorn entertainment at its finest. What more could you want from a tongue-in-cheek B-movie that will certainly deliver the goods?